Today, we'll talk about how to make money while you are losing in any condition. I'll cover my last weekend trades. I'll show you the mistakes that I made during the weekend and how you should avoid them. Then I'll show you how I manage trades like a pro trader, so you can too. We have so much to cover. If you're ready, let's start. Welcome our free trading course, all about price action trading strategies and smart money concepts. Today, we'll talk about superior risk management. If you are looking for a structured table of contents, I set it up for you. You can find it on Google Drive or directly from my website, which is in the description. It is important to watch videos in order to fully Okay, let's learn how to make money by losing, even in the worst trading conditions. Last weekend, I made mistakes, like any other human beings. The first mistake that I made was I did not check any higher time frames. Straight jump to trading from 15 and 5 minutes, but still made money. How? Let's learn it. The first thing I did was draw this premium and discount between significant highs and lows, and started to observe what kind of price action structure here. These equal lows were a significant and a possible target in my mind. At the same time, I saw this trend liquidity above. This directly indicates low probability trading conditions. It can go up or down. So, I made a quick bias theory. I wanted the price to go up and clear the trendline liquidity in the premium zone, then reach the OTE. Later on, do some kind of market structure shift and go down to the discount zone to clear the equal lows. There was also this imbalance that supports my idea. I did all of this in a couple of minutes and created a trade idea. This is a mistake. Single-time quick analysis is actually not great because we do not have much data on our hands. Okay, let's talk about my first trade. I determined this OTE collides with a swing high as an important liquidity point. There was also this supply area, the rope-based drop, that can pull the price and react. Let's zoom in and talk in detail. Once I noticed this break, I fully focused on this green candlestick. Check this candlestick. It is a large, powerful displacement with a giant imbalance behind it. It also created this tiny support and resistance flip area. So, this is how I placed my entry. After the price reacted to the imbalance and powered up again, my stop order was under the order block area previous swing low. Once I started to gain profit, I moved my stop loss to break even. And it stopped me out at my break even. As you can see, the position worked great. My analysis was correct, just stopped out at break even without any profit taken for this position. Does break even bother me? No, not at all. I do not have any kind of emotional attachment to my trades. Break even means nothing to me. It only indicates that I have protected my account. You can see this equal high on the left. I did not fully focus on this. This was supposed to be the first profit point. This is my second mistake. I was physically tired on the weekend and I was not fully committed. If you are not fully committed, physically tired or depressed, do not trade. Just go and relax for the day. After my break-even incident, I just paused for a second in order to not rush or take a revenge. However, when the great trade opportunity appeared, I quickly and calmly analyzed it. You can notice the second break right at this point. I opened the 1 minute time frame, observed everything quickly. First of all, draw my premium and discount and optimal trade entry and see what we are doing and where the price is. Again, magically, the significant imbalance collides with the optimal trade entry point and the price quickly reacts to this area. If you look closer at the area, the price also clears these tiny equal lows. Now you may ask, how do I see all of these in seconds? This is just experience and years of practice. I cannot give you a magic pill that will make you see all of this. You need time and a lot of practice to see all of this. At the top, you can notice trendline liquidity. At the bottom, you can also see how the price clears the liquidity and powers up before the explosive upward movement. And this is how I made my entry for this 2 hours trading setup. As you can see, even my analysis was quick, even if I was tired, even if I was distracted. If I can keep my cool, if I can remain calm, I can trade any day in any condition. So, on Sunday, I took another poorly analyzed trade in a single time frame. What is happening to me? This weekend, I did not perform well, but I made money. I will explain it at the end. This 5-minute range kept going on for a really long time. As you remember, why do ranges exist? Preparing the price for pumps and dumps. You remember our equal lows and imbalance at the bottom? I had eyes on this. I was thinking this could be a great reaction point. Let's zoom in on the price action. I noticed these 2 giant imbalances above. My mind again quickly created a trading case. I was expecting the price to go up to one of these imbalances after an equal low created at the bottom. So I was looking for a counter trade. I made my entry right after equal lows cleared and the price touched the bottom imbalance. My original stop was under the imbalance candlestick. Once my price reached 1 hour profit, I moved my stop loss to break even. This time, once the price reached 1 hour, I quickly secured some profit. And with the stop loss at break even, I gained the zero risk trading status. I enjoy having zero risk trading status. 2 break even, 1 win, 2 R plus some little profit with the last trade. At the end of the day, I closed the weekend with around 2 R gain. But how? How do I make money while I have losing positions? It is because of superior risk management. First of all, let's talk about my mistakes. On the weekend, I was tired, I was outside taking care of some business, and I got home to do some cleaning. Like every person, I was exhausted. And when you are physically tired, your focus will lack and your analysis will get poorer. My second mistake, I made a single time frame analysis that any of you should avoid, especially for scalping and day trading. The last mistake was trading on the weekend is always tricky. It lacks volume and proper price action. However, I still made money even though I had many mistakes. How? It is all about superior risk management. You can make money with a 20% win rate. Yes, with a 20% win rate if you want to, if you commit to your risk management. Firstly, I kept my cool and I did not bring emotions when my trade stopped at break-even. Then I did not revenge trade to make money. This is a horrible way of losing money. It will destroy your account. Finally, I managed trades. I managed stop losses, I managed break-evens, I managed partials. I managed the risk all together. You can make money by losing in any trading environment if you learn to manage the risk. Some of you are still looking for holy grail strategies, but it is in front of you. Superior management. Okay folks, ending this great lecture, learned about risk management and how to trade in any condition. Probably next week we will look into more trading examples. I hope you subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thank you, please take care and see you soon.